So I just watched Red vs. Blue Zero, and it kinda sucked. Now for those who don't know, Red vs. Blue is a web series that got started all the way back in the ancient year of 2003. It followed the misadventures of two groups of soldiers stuck in a stalemate in the middle of a boxed canyon, and it was one of the first shows to pioneer machinima as a legitimate storytelling medium. All of the characters are fun and three-dimensional, the dialogue is snappy and feels like something out of Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Why would solar power make him sick?
Is he a Republican?
What do we really need SARS for anyway? All he ever did was yell at us a bunch and tell us we suck. We'll just split up his duties. You yell at me and I'll tell you you suck.
Shut up and get in the hole, Griff!
You suck, Simmons.
At any moment, they're gonna come over that hill, guns blazing, yelling, "Charge!"
Retreat!
And the lengths to which these guys go to in telling a coherent story using nothing but video game footage is fascinating. What I love most about this show is how they're able to convey so much with so little to work with. Whenever they were faced with a problem, they always found creative ways to work around these limitations, somehow enhancing the experience by proxy. Gus had a really shitty mic, so they added a radio helmet filter onto everyone else so they'd all sound the same, leading to the iconic radio chatter sound. You can't have a color other than red or blue holding a flag, which is how the infamous PvP scene came about. They blew up the cameraman to get this shot of church, they would record the same scene twice in order to show his ghost, tracking shots were accomplished using a tank, black bars were added to cover up the game's interface, the list goes on forever. Despite the show basically being an excuse for a group of friends to get together and play Halo, it ended up establishing a multi-million-dollar company and became the longest-running episodic web series ever, of all time. What started as a situational, lighthearted comedy turned into an epic space opera with breathtaking action and even somber tear-jerking moments. If you haven't already, please check it out, I assure you it's well worth your time. So when Rooster Teeth announced a spin-off to the show called Red vs. Blue Zero, I was kind of optimistic. The Reds and Blues stories are pretty much finished, and after nearly 4 instances where the show could have ended and nobody would have complained, I totally get the notion of taking the show in a new direction. Now, personally, I would have just ended the show and made something entirely different, but I still wanted to give Zero a chance. When the people working on it were announced, I was legitimately hyped. It was being directed by Torian Crawford, a man who's responsible for most of my favorite Death Battle episodes. Omega Sparks and Darylf Media would be doing the music. One of the main writers was Noel Wiggins. It seemed like we were in for something special. I can't see any reason this could possibly go, oh damn. Once we started getting previews showing off the animation, that's when I started getting worried. Basically, all of the footage we were shown were action scenes, and it didn't seem like there would be much of anything in the way of witty dialogue. You know, the thing that makes Red vs. Blue what it is. But as a loyal fan, I saw fit to watch the show anyway and give it a chance. And now I want those precious minutes back. This show focuses on a new group called Shatter Squad, and every single character is as one note as you can get. Zero is just a really high-budget fan fiction. Not a single joke made me laugh, and there was never a time where I took anything in the story seriously. There's a new group of bad guys that are trying to collect all of the MacGuffins to rule the universe. Our usual heroes aren't powerful enough, so it's up to a new group to save the day. Every new character feels like a self-insert, and not a single one leaves an impression on me. Part of why that is comes down to how awful the pacing is. The first episode of the show spends the majority of its time on the villains, and we don't get to see our heroes until the last few minutes. In the next episode, the show goes about as if we already know these characters and their relationships, and it can get really confusing. I didn't know where Shatter Squad came from. I had no idea West was East's father, and for the longest time I thought Axel was the same age as one. It took me way too long to figure out he was her father. The show tries to solve this problem by having Carolina go over everyone's backstories, and the entire scene gives me major steak dinner vibes from Suicide Squad. That scene is terribly written for the same reasons this one is. Instead of introducing us to these characters organically, we're basically read their baseball collecting card stats. It doesn't even make sense in the context of this scene. Why would Carolina introduce these people to themselves? The pacing issues don't stop there. We're hardly ever given a moment to breathe, with each episode having an action scene for what feels like every 2 minutes. We don't get an episode with no action until episode 6 in this 8-episode long series. An easy joke to make here is that at least the show is mercifully short, but that's truly the root problem with all these pacing issues. Zero should have been 13 episodes bare minimum. Now, I can't confirm if this is actually true, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was supposed to be a movie instead. It would explain why the first episode is structured like a cold opening, but even then it wouldn't solve the issues with introducing several new characters all at once without developing or giving us a reason to care about any of them. The exact same problem Suicide Squad had. Speaking of Suicide Squad, Zero has that classic scene where our protagonists are depressed and ready to give up, so somebody has to give a speech to rally them before they go off into the final battle, and it's a trope I wish would die. It's contrived as hell and exists only to give one a cool moment. The whole time I was thinking, wait, are we seriously doing this right now? One of the characters even says, wow, that was a really good speech. And you know your speech is good when you have to write one of the characters saying that it's good. Gee, I wonder why they didn't include a character saying something like that in Sergeant Kimball's speeches. I fucking wonder, Red versus Blue. Clearly it would have been a massive improvement. The reason those speeches are so memorable is because they were built up to for years. You have to earn scenes like those. You can't just throw in a new cast of characters and expect us to be as invested in them within 2 months as we are with a cast we've known for almost 2 decades. There are better ways to make one look like a good leader. Actually, wait a minute. Is she the leader? I can't tell because the chain of command has no goddamn structure. Is Axel the leader? Maybe West is the leader. Carolina? Now, we do get a few original cast members back, so I will give this show some credit. Is what I would say if they didn't fuck them up too. Carolina isn't that badly written, but it's nothing to write home about. She calls Wash by his first name way too often. It feels out of character and honestly condescending. Wash spends half of the show being tortured and kidnapped and doesn't get to do anything really. The show also very nonchalantly brushes aside his medical condition from previous seasons. He's just cured now, and it ruins all of the drama from previous seasons surrounding this aspect of his character, one of the only things I actually liked in season 16. But nobody gets as royally screwed over as Tucker does. It's worth noting that Tucker is my favorite character in the show, which is why I'm so pissed that the writers just don't know how to write him anymore. He was awful in season 16, somewhat fixed in season 17, and now he's back to his Shizno personality, the only difference being that he's somehow worse. This show managed to pull off in one episode what took the Shizno paradox a whole season. He takes all the credit for saving the universe. He makes sex jokes at the expense of others during dramatic moments. He doesn't get to fight and is treated as a glorified escort mission. Oh, and he gets killed. Tucker fucking dies. Yes, they bring him back, but the fact that these people had the audacity to end episode 5 with,
It's Tucker. He's dead.
make us wait a week and then resurrect him is so insulting. This is not Tucker. The Tucker I know is laid back but serious when necessary, managed to outsmart a freelancer, held off a platoon of mercs by himself, is loyal and devoted to his friends, and developed enough to become a leader and deuteragonist. Can you tell how passionate I am about this show yet? I mean, I understand why they killed Tucker. They needed the bad guys to be able to use his sword. But wait, how did they activate the sword if Tucker's still alive? That's a very good question. They don't explain it. All of the voice acting outside of the original cast is subpar at best and cringy as hell at worst. Fiona and Noel do a fine job, though Noel sometimes sounds like he's trying way too hard to sound like Griff.
What was that?
West is the show's version of Sarge, except way more forced and wooden. The military accent never sounds natural, and every time he speaks, he sounds like he's trying way too hard to sound gruff and weathered, which makes it come off as embarrassing.
For now, we got bigger problems.
This character makes me lose brain cells. And the villains in this show are laughable excuses for antagonists. Their over-the-top delivery is one thing, but you couldn't come up with a more basic bitch of a motivation than Zero has. RVB basically gave us their version of Infinite. He wants power. That's it. Nintendo villains have more depth than this guy. And the show even calls him out on it. Any animation outside of the fight scenes looks really cheap. It manages to suffer from being both stilted and far too active at the same time. These movements are so friggin' exaggerated and unnatural. It feels like I'm watching Food Fight at times. And when the animators aren't making the characters move like ballerinas, they try to imitate the classic machinima style by having their heads bob. But they even manage to screw that up. They only move their necks as opposed to their whole torsos. Why would you try to imitate the machinima style by making it look more awkward? Even green screening in actual character models from Halo 5 would have looked better. The most dramatic moments of the show have barely any movement whatsoever, but instead they were filled to the brim with subtleties that allow us to fill in the blanks ourselves, and it can be emotionally devastating at times. Simply holding the camera on a character model holds much more emotional resonance than whatever the hell this is. Less is more. But hey, what about the fight scenes? It's the main draw of this show, after all. Surely the fight scenes are good.
Nope.
I won't be too hard on this team by comparing them to Monty's work, God rest his soul, because that'd be unfair. But as good as the choreography can be sometimes, there are still some glaring problems, such as, well, the glare. Why did they have to make the effects and lighting so bright? It can get so bad at times that I don't even know what's happening on the screen. At least Torian's early death battles had the excuse of being on a tight budget. Even when taking the choreography out of the equation, Monty's animations are still far better, and despite not looking as pretty, they still hold up. After recently rewatching some of the freelance Neuromancer saga, it revitalized my appreciation for how much attention and care used to be put into the action for this show. It was able to be high octane and exciting while still maintaining a coherent and compelling story. The goal was always clear, and I was genuinely engaged because of how engaging these characters are to begin with. This show has so much action packed so closely together that it becomes impossible for any of it to stand out. Not to mention the fact that I hardly care about any of these characters in the first place, and that is the biggest sin you can commit in an action series. Zero seriously needed to take a moment and just breathe. One defense I hear fairly often is that it's supposed to be different from Red vs. Blue. The creators themselves even said they were trying to mimic the tone of an old Saturday morning cartoon. You see that title? It says Red vs. Blue. If you want to make something unique, then why not just make an entirely new show? I mean, it still wouldn't have been good, but at least it wouldn't have taken the RVB brand down with it. If it wanted to be its own thing, it should have been called something else. If it wanted to be a continuation of the show that newcomers could get into without having to catch up on years worth of content, then it shouldn't have included any of the original cast. You can't have it both ways. I'm not saying Zero couldn't have worked. Season 8 and beyond of the show, with some exceptions, still has that classic Blood Gulch feeling. There may be action scenes and more plot, but we still have the OG cast, machinima bits, witty dialogue, and creative storytelling techniques that made us fall in love with the show in the first place. It was still Red vs. Blue. Even recent reboots have done a much better job of being their own thing while still paying respect to the source material they're based on. I am not by any means saying the team working on the show disrespects Red vs. Blue whatsoever. It's clear that they were really passionate about this project, and I know for a fact they're passionate about Red vs. Blue. Pretty much the entire crew for this show worked on the recent RVB episode of Death Battle, which is basically a gigantic love letter to the series. The existence of this episode baffles me because the animation doesn't suffer from any of the problems I've discussed here. The lighting is perfect, the movements are natural, Tucker actually gets to be badass, and they even manage to faithfully recreate the machinima style when they talk. Hell, they even go as far as to green screen footage from the game in. Their hearts were in the right place, but this show feels like a good case study of what happens when artists are given too much creative freedom. The limitations of OG Red vs. Blue and even Death Battle to an extent are what make those shows so great. Limitation forces creativity. Money does not guarantee quality. I do hope this team gets to work on something else in the future, because I genuinely believe they're all incredibly talented and nice people. Though I'd prefer it to be a different IP so that the series can finally be left to rest in peace. For the love of God, please just let this show die in peace. If you want mindless action, then I guess you could get a kick out of this show, though I'd say just check out Monty's Legacy for something more smart. If you want something specifically made by Torian and his crew, then I highly recommend checking out the recent animated short Action Bots. It's incredibly cute and charming, and it does a fantastic job of replicating Monty's style while still being its own thing. But if you're a Red vs. Blue fan like me, then you're likely not going to get much of anything out of Zero. Just do what I do and binge the whole show for the 50th time. What are you gonna do? Go outside? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work on a video you guys actually wanted to see, and I'm giving this show a 2 out of 10.